You know, we went to the blast, we had the frame done. You saw me actually cut this frame in half, and we were talking about doing a mid-80s pro street style truck. But here's the problem. Pro street trucks, even pro street cars, you really can't do a whole lot with them. Yeah, they're cool, but a truck is a truck. You might want to throw some trash in the back, a bicycle, who knows what. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go low, raise the floor, tube chassis, big wheels all the way around. We still keep that truck presence. You can throw a barbecue pit in the back, go to the field, your 40 acres, wherever you got, and have a barbecue and have a party. Throw a keg in the back. It doesn't matter because it's a truck. And that's what we're going for. We decided to leave Pro Street and go with a truck. That is where the project is going now. All right, this is really important whenever you're doing a job of this magnitude, especially when you're building a chassis. You need to come up with some kind of plan. What I've done here is I've drawn the basic shape of my chassis. Each one of these arrows dictates how long I want to make it. Of course, the middle of the truck is going to be longer. You need to get a wheelbase number. Our wheelbase is 116. I'm going to do 116 and a half because it'll actually center the rear wheel in the well. That's personal preference. Some guys don't do that. Something else that's really important when you're doing your chassis, these would represent my bumpers. I got to make sure that I have locations and mounts in place to mount the bumpers because this is a street truck. Something else, you got your rotors. You want to make sure that your rotors are the right width. Now, being that the car is going to be really lower, our track width is going to be narrower than the factory. So you have to make sure that the tires fit inside the fender wells. This is the kind of stuff that you need to take into consideration when building a chassis. The more details you have on this, the easier it's going to be to build your chassis. Now, we're going to start cutting some steel and piecing it all together. Now, something you guys need to know. The stock frame on those style trucks is a C channel. It looks like a C, and it's an 1/8 inch thick. But here's the kicker. That stuff is heat treated, so it's really hard, and it's got some spring to it. What I like to use when I build a chassis from scratch is 120 wall tubing, all right? Now, this is ERW. Right here's this line. That's the weld line, and it's actually welded by a machine, and it's done by computer, so the weld is consistent. But what they do is they take this piece of metal, they roll it out, and then they run it through a machine, and it actually rolls it over to a 2x3 tubing, and then it gets welded. Now, this is 120 wall, so it's just a tick under 1/8 inch, but it's stronger because it's totally enclosed. That's why I prefer to use that. Now, some guys will use 3/16, but I just prefer the 120 wall. I've used it for years. I've never had any major problems. Something else that's really important for me, when I build stuff, I like to try and get it as low as possible. There are guys who will use 2x4 or even 2x6, but what happens is you run into the floor getting on top of the rail, and you may not get the car low enough or the truck low enough. So by using 2x3, I can mount my body mount right in the middle. The truck sits down on top of it. I have room, and I can get the truck really low. It's more of an optical illusion because you're not working with as much steel, the body's lower, and it looks cooler. That's the way I do it. And all my braces are 2x2 120 wall. This just makes it, stylish. So I'm going to unclamp it. I'll dress these welds up. Then I'll flip it over, clamp it back down, weld up the other side. Once that cools, I'll build the other rail right on top of it. That way everything lines up perfect. Here's a little trick I learned a long time ago. When you're welding these frame rails like this, the weld a lot of times will actually be a little bit higher than where you're welding. And that's fine. So you take a piece of flat stock, it can be scrap, it doesn't matter, as long as they're all the same thickness, and you lay it down and you put your piece of tubing on top of it. That way, the weld isn't pressing up on the steel, the new steel, like that. It makes it all nice and flat. And then once you get it all set up, clamp it together. I like to use my square to get both the pieces even, because it'll tell you if you're right or wrong. We've got a pretty good sized gap here. It's not the prettiest in the world, and if I dress up the other side, it'll become short down here. So what I'm going to have to do is just weld the gap. This is what happens when you cut it by hand sometimes. You're not exactly in line, and it runs off, and it's just one of those things that you got to live with. Other than that, the rest is all pretty tight. So I'm going to fill that, and we're going to roll with it. Okay, here's what we've got. I know my gap was a little big, and that's fine, because this is what happens when you're doing each one of these cuts individually. It's inevitable. You're going to have a gap that's really not, you don't like it. So what I did was I filled it, I ground it clean, then I welded it again and cleaned it out again, but there was some porosity, so I hit it with the die grinder. Now, my next step is to put a nice bead on it. Then I'll put some washers on top of each joint, which I do anyway, and I should be good to go. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Dave. This is what I'm talking about. These gloves, they're always in the way. Dango gloves, man. See, now I take these washers, I'll lay it right across the joint like that. I'll weld it all up, and it'll help distribute the load, so I know where that weaker point is. I've got load and it's covered. Also, what I'll do is I'll clean these up with some brake parts cleaner, and then I know they're good, and I won't have any problems welding them. And I got plain washers. Don't get the zinc coated ones. You can weld the zinc, but it's just not as good a weld because there's stuff in the metal. Yeah, that'll work perfect. All right, let me weld this last one. Okay, so here's what's next. We've already got the main structure of the C-notch built for the frame. Now comes the middle of the frame. And what I've been using all day is this jet cold saw. And the thing I like about a cold saw, the metal doesn't get hot when you're done with it. It has coolant already built in it, and it makes nice straight cuts. Look at that. It's almost as sexy as Troy. Okay, so here's what we've got. We know that our frame is 34 inches wide. Now, with the 2-inch on each side, that makes it 30 inches because it's 2 and 2. So my cross member is going to be 30 inches. When I weld it together, that gives me 34 inches wide. Something else that's really important, you want to make sure that what you're working on is level. I don't care what you're doing. If you're on a piece of plywood, if it's level side to side and lengthwise, that's going to make it where your frame is level. Because it's key that your frame is level, especially in the middle part of the frame here where the cab sits, half the bed is going to mount. It's like your bones in your body. Your skeleton has to be a certain way to hold everything in place so your internal organs don't get messed up. Okay, here's what we've got. We know now the frame rail is level, both sides. Side to side, front to back, all of that's level. I've got a temporary brace in here, which I'm just going to tack in because I don't know where the transmission's going to go, so why put a brace in and then put another one like 6-8 inches forward? It doesn't make sense. I'll tack this one in real good. I'll weld this one in, and if you'll see, there's a gap there. And I know what some guys are thinking, well, why didn't you put the washers on the outside? What I'll do, what I always do, is I like to put the washer on the inside instead of the outside because that way when you do your sheet metal work, you've got a nice flat surface to deal with. I would rather fill this gap or trim around it so the tubing fits right, whatever I got to do to get there, because I know this isn't going to go nowhere, and then I'm going to put a gusset in the backside, so this will be a nice solid point, and then you've got a nice smooth surface to work with when you're doing your sheet metal. It's really important to do that. Something else that's really important is you always need to check your measurements. You always need to measure it 3 and 4 times before you make a cut or lay down a bead. It's really important. So we're ready to rock it out. I'm going to weld this one in, tack this one in. The frame will be nice and square, and then I'll move back here. Yeah, I'll move back here. Okay, some of you guys are probably wondering, why is this notch so huge? Well, my plan is to run a really big tire because gas mileage is important. And what I always want to try to do in anything I build is have the exhaust go over the rear end. I don't like dumping it out in front of the rear tires. I'm just not a fan of it. I like to go over and go all the way out the back or right behind the rear tires like, you know, a stock car or a truck would be. So what I did was I overcompensated. I've got a really tall bracket for my 4-link, which goes this way. It's just tall. So what I'll do is set everything up. The tires are going to be like a 305, 50, 20, or a 22. So we're going to have 17 inches at least before the middle of the rear end, you know, to the ground. So I've got to compensate for that. And you know what? If nothing else, I'll cut this weld, shorten the bracket. It's only a 45-degree cut, and bring it down to earth because this truck, the plan is to have it 4 inches off the ground. So I got to compensate for that because right now I don't have my wheels and tires. But it's coming along nicely.